For years, Joanne Woodward didn't say anything as the world went crazy over her marriage to Paul Newman, the Hollywood star that every woman desired and the guy she somehow managed to keep. Their love story was shown to be perfect, nearly holy. But now that Joanne is 95, she's not holding back. Finally, she's telling the truth about her life with Newman, and what she says breaks the fairy tale that everyone thought they knew. From Georgia to Hollywood Heights. Joanne Woodward was merely a Southern girl with big city dreams before the world called her Paul Newman's wife. Joanne Gignilia Trimier Woodward was born on February 27, 1930, in Thomasville, Georgia. Her name had a lot of meaning. The middle names, which came from old Huguenot culture, signaled that the daughter would be special. But her background wasn't the only thing that shaped her life. Her mother's love of movies was the spark that started it all. Eleanor Woodward loved movies so much that she named her daughter after Joan Crawford, a famous actress from Hollywood. This gave her daughter a lot of ambition. Joanne had one brother, Wade Jr., and a restless nature that made her move about a lot as a child. Before settling in Marietta, Georgia, the Woodwards moved around a lot during her childhood. They went from Thomasville to Blakely to Thomaston. Joanne went to Marietta High School there, where she initially found her stage, which she would never fully leave. She also never forgot where she came from. She stayed true to her hometown even after she became famous. She supported Marietta High and the Strand Theater in the city. But she didn't fall in love with Hollywood at school. It all started on an exciting night in Atlanta. Joanne, who was 9 years old, was at the premiere of Gone with the Wind and was caught up in the bustle of flashing lights and famous people arriving. She ran into the procession of actors and, without thinking, sat down on the lap of Laurence Olivier. He was dating Vivien Leigh, the famous actress who played the lead role in the movie at the time. Security would have taken most youngsters away, but Joanne made sure everyone remembered her. She brought it up again decades later when she worked with Olivier on a TV show called Come Back Little Sheba in 1977. He glanced at her and said that he remembered the brave little girl who sat on his lap. Joanne's teenage years changed dramatically when her parents divorced and she had to move again. This time, it's to Greenville, South Carolina. She got more than just a diploma when she graduated from Greenville High. She departed with experience from the Little Theater, where she showed that she wasn't simply a dreamer, she was a performer. Her love of drama led her to Louisiana State University, where she joined the Chi Omega sorority and studied drama. Getting better at her craft before setting her sights on New York City, the only stage big enough for her dreams. Joanne didn't waste any time once she got there. She put herself right where talent was formed by studying at the Actors Studio and training with Sanford Meisner at the local playhouse. She wasn't just memorizing lines. She was working hard to become an actress who would one day make her mark on Hollywood. She wasn't married to Paul Newman yet. She didn't win an Oscar or the perfect picture of America's favorite couple. She was just Joanne, the Southern girl who once stormed a movie premiere, chased her ambitions, and wouldn't let herself be ordinary. But she was never meant to be normal. The restless fire that had taken her from Greenville to LSU to the streets of New York was only starting to burn. The girl who used to watch stars from the outside was now stepping into their world and making room for herself, taking over the stage and the screen. Joanne Woodward was no longer the small girl who crashed movie premieres by the early 1950s. She was really fighting her way into the business. Her first TV appearance was in 1952 on Robert Montgomery Presents in an episode called Penny. It wasn't dazzling or newsworthy, but it was a start. Before long, she was working hard to get on stage. She kept auditioning until she got a job as an understudy for the William Inge Drama Picnic in 1953 and 1954. And this is where fate came in. She ran into Paul Newman backstage. He was still married to Jacqueline Witt, his first wife, at the time. But there was no denying the bond between him and Joanne. Behind the curtain of a Broadway show, the man who would become her great love walked into her life. Joanne used TV as a testing ground. She was in a lot of series, like Tales of Tomorrow, Goodyear Playhouse, Danger, the Philco Goodyear Television Playhouse, the Ford Television Theater, and Omnibus. She wasn't famous yet, but she was making a name for herself by showing up over and over again until Hollywood couldn't ignore her. Count 3 and Prey, a post-Civil War Western, was her first movie. She played a fierce orphan in it. Fox signed her to a long-term contract after the role made her famous. By 1956, she was the star of A Kiss Before Dying, a thriller in which she played a rich heiress opposite Robert Wagner. This movie showed how compelling she could be on screen. She even went back to Broadway with The Lovers, and even though the show didn't last long, Joanne's love of acting on theater and cinema never faded. But everything changed in 1957. In The Three Faces of Eve, Joanne Woodward shocked the world. She played a woman with three personalities: a homemaker, a seductive rebel, and a balanced young woman. Critics couldn't believe they were witnessing the same actor in one movie since her portrayal was so rich and complex. Neither could the Academy. Joanne won the Oscar for Best Actress while wearing a dress she had sewn together herself. There was no expensive dress, no Hollywood style, just Joanne, her raw skill, and a needle and thread. It was the kind of event that made her a part of history. After that, she became Fox's main actress. Movies like No Down Payment and The Sound and the Fury with Yul Brynner made her famous. In The Fugitive Kind, Sidney Lumet cast her with Marlon Brando and Anna Magnani. The movie didn't do well at the box office, but Joanne's work with Paul Newman was getting all the attention. They both starred in From the Terrace, which she later said she loved largely because she believed she looked like Lana Turner. Then they starred in Paris Blues, showing that their chemistry was just as strong on film as it was off. Joanne took a big step into burlesque in 1963, working closely with Gypsy Rose Lee to get her moves just right. By the middle of the 1960s, she could hold her own against big names like Sean Connery in A Fine Madness and wow audiences in A Big Hand for the Little Lady. But it was Rachel, which Newman wrote and directed, that delivered her one of her most moving performances. Playing a lonely teacher looking for love. The part got her another Oscar nomination, proving that she was more than just Mrs. Newman. Joanne's career has grown to include all kinds of media by the late 1970s. She was in The Inn with Burt Reynolds, See How She Runs, which won an Emmy, and Come Back, Little Sheba, when she reunited with Laurence Olivier and reminded him of the time she jumped into his lap as a toddler. She wasn't only an actress, she directed an episode of Family in 1979. She also had what it took to run the show. She was busy in the 1980s. She was in The Shadow Box, Crisis at Central High, and Candida on Broadway in 1981 and 1982. She also performed with Newman again in Harry and Son. She also won an Emmy for her role in the 1985 TV movie Do You Remember Love? When she wasn't acting, she was writing and directing. In 1982, she adapted Shirley Jackson's Come Along With Me, and in The Glass Menagerie, she took on Tennessee Williams. Joanne wasn't just getting parts, she was also getting awards. She won many Emmys, an Oscar, and even distinction as a producer for Broadway's Dreamers, which was the legacy of the group theater. She was able to show it decade after decade that her husband, her marriage, or even the Hollywood industry did not define her. She made her own name. Joanne Woodward created a name for herself in Hollywood by taking risks, giving raw performances, and being real, which set her apart from the rest of the polished stars. She wasn't after fame. She was going after the job. And by doing that, she made herself impossible to forget. But Joanne's narrative was never simply about her job. It was also about the man who had been with her for 50 years. Through the good times and the bad times. She not only made her own legacy, but she also helped make one of the best love stories in Hollywood history. A business relationship that transformed into a love story. The love story between Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward wasn't just another Hollywood affair. It set the benchmark for what a long-lasting marriage in show business could be like. They were married for 50 years, from 1958 until Newman's death in 2008. And throughout those decades, they constructed a life that included love, family, grief, and a legacy. The link began quietly. They initially met while Newman was still married to Jackie Witt and starred in the Broadway play Picnic. Joanne didn't fall in love right away. Years later, she said that at first she wasn't impressed by how he looked, but later she compared him to an ice cream soda on a hot day. It was so perfect that you couldn't help but want it. It wasn't until they got back together on the set of The Long Hot Summer in 1957 that their friendship developed into something real. Not long after Newman's first marriage ended, he and Joanne started a new life together. On January 29, 1958, they got married in Las Vegas. Joanne became the stepmother to Newman's 3 children from his first marriage, Scott, Susan, and Stephanie. She and Newman have 3 additional daughters together: Eleanor Nell, Melissa, and Claire Clee. Their family life took place in Westport, Connecticut, which is far from the craziness of Hollywood. Nell, their first child, was born in April 1959, the same year Newman got the main part in The Young Philadelphians. Nell would later try her hand at acting under the name Nell Potts. In 1993, she started her own organic business called Newman's. The couple had a daughter named Melissa in 1961, the same day their movie Paris Blues came out in the US. A fitting twist for a family that lived and breathed movies. Melissa also acted for a short time after her parents. Claire Clee followed next in 1965. She was the youngest and grew up loving horses. She subsequently became a nationally rated equestrian before giving up her time to help her father's charity. Their professional relationship grew as their family did. In 1963, they made their imprint at Grauman's Chinese Theater by putting their hands and feet in the cement and signed their names next to their prints. Joanne was one of the first people to be honored on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 1958, years before Newman earned his star in 1994. Their marriage wasn't only based on looks or celebrity, it was based on comedy. Joanne once said that even if Newman was a track, what mattered most was that he could make her laugh. And that was what kept them going. When asked about fidelity, Newman was very clear when he said he had steak at home. There was no reason to go out and get a burger. Their jobs often crossed paths. Their work together on Rachel in 1968 was some of the best. Joanne stared while Newman gave orders. That year, both the husband and wife were nominated for Academy Awards. This was one of the few times that a couple had been recognized together in this fashion. Their daughter, Nell, even played a younger version of her mother's character in the movie. Joanne's role in the 1972 movie The Effective Gamma Rays on Man and the Moon Marigolds, directed by Newman and starring Nell again, earned her a Golden Globe nomination and the Best Actress award at Cannes. But their narrative was also sad. Newman's oldest son, Scott, died in 1978 at the age of 28 from an accidental overdose of drugs and alcohol. Newman later claimed that he had convinced himself that Scott's behavior was just the foolishness of youth. He also said that he had begged his son for forgiveness more than once while on his knees. Newman founded the Scott Newman Center in Scott's memory. It is a place where people may learn about drug usage. The tragedy hit the family hard, but Newman and Joanne threw themselves into helping others even more. In 1988, they started the Hole in the Wall Gang Camp in Ashford, Connecticut. It was a place where kids with terrible diseases could have fun and make friends for free. It became one of Newman's biggest interests, and famous people banded together to support it. Newman once said that acting didn't take away his obligation as a citizen. He still had to give back. Even though they didn't make as many movies together, they were always there for each other. Empire Falls, an HBO miniseries that aired in 2005, was their last project together on film. Both were up for Emmys, Golden Globes, and SAG Awards, and Newman won all of them. It was a fitting end for a couple who had spent years supporting each other's career. Their love stayed strong even when no one was looking. In 2008, they quietly celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, which is a big deal for most Hollywood couples. Joanne once said that beauty fades and doesn't endure forever, but having a companion who could make her laugh every day was the best gift. Paul Newman died of lung cancer that same year. On September 26, 2008, he died in his farmhouse in Westport, with family and friends by his side. He was 83 years old. Newman and Woodward beat the odds in Hollywood for 50 years. Their marriage was based on commitment, laughter, and a strong relationship. They were lovers, worked together, and gave to charity. They were proof that even in a world full of lies, a real love story could last. A lot of bad things have happened to Joanne Woodward. In February, Joanne Woodward turned 95. She was one of the last big stars from Hollywood's golden age. On her birthday, she was far away from the cameras, discreetly tucked away in Connecticut. The lady who seemed to have it all, an Oscar winner, Paul Newman's wife, and the darling of the business. For more than 10 years, Joanne has not been in the public eye. In 1993, she played her last movie role in Philadelphia. In 2005, she was on TV for the last time, acting with Paul in Empire Falls. In 2013, she was seen in public for the last time. Nothing has happened since then. Joanne entirely stepped back after Paul's death in 2008. In December 2024, the couple's fancy Manhattan penthouse, where they had parties with famous acquaintances, was up for sale for around $10 million. The glitz is gone. Joanne now lives in the family's ancient 19th century home in Westport, Connecticut. She and Paul acquired the house to raise their daughters away from the noise of California. It's where they made a life for themselves. It's also where Paul died and where Joanne is now living her last chapter. But underlying this peaceful place sits a heavy truth that is hard to bear. Joanne was 77 years old when she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2007, just a few days before Paul found out he had terminal cancer. She stopped being in the public eye nearly right away. Her girls were her moorings, Westport was her safe place, and the Hollywood star who everyone thought had everything slowly vanished from view. Ethan Hawke worked on The Last Movie Stars, which was a 6-part docuseries about Paul and Joanne. He told the family why they needed it done right now. The goal was to let it go while Joanne was still alive, so she could still see it, even though she had Alzheimer's for 15 years. The movie wasn't only about the story of Paul and Joanne. It was about giving her something back before time stole it all away. Joanne Woodward's narrative looks like a dream from the outside. Fame, honors, beauty, and the love of one of Hollywood's most sought-after men. But beneath the glitz and glam, her life has been full with tragedy, grief, and fights that most fans don't know about. That's where the illusion breaks down. Joanne Woodward finally speaks up about Paul Newman at the age of 95. Joanne Woodward didn't say anything for years. The public worshipped her marriage to Paul Newman, the blue-eyed god of Hollywood, but she just sat there, charming, courteous, and steadfast. People called their love tale the best of the century. A golden couple that can't be hurt, broken up with, or hurt. But now that Joanne is 95, she doesn't believe in the fairy story anymore. What has started to come out from those closest to Mary and from Paul himself through his post-mortem memoir is a picture of a marriage that was far messier than the story said it was. And it's a narrative that shows that even the most famous people in Hollywood couldn't avoid the pain of betrayal, temptation, sadness, and regret. Joanne Woodward and Paul Newman first saw each other in 1953 when they were both understudies for the Broadway play Picnic. Paul was already married and had 3 kids, but he and Joanne were instantly attracted to each other. The bond was so powerful that it led to an affair that ended his first marriage and, years later, resulted to a marriage that is still going strong in Hollywood. Newman had divorced his first wife, Jackie Witt, by 1958. And got married to Joanne in Las Vegas. They would spend the next 50 years together, have 3 kids, make 16 movies together, and go through storms that the public rarely saw. People thought they were untouchable, committed, passionate, and perfectly balanced. But things were never so easy in the family household. Melissa, their daughter, once said that the marriage was hard because people held on to a fairy tale version of her parents that wasn't true. It wasn't all sunshine and happiness at home. There were extended periods of stress, fights that started and stopped, and times when the marriage itself seemed on the verge of falling apart. Melissa said that what kept them together was that they never gave up, even when things were at their worst. The problems were more than just work stress or personality clashes. Paul Newman was charming and charismatic, but he also had a lot of problems. The death of his only son, Scott, tormented him. Who died in 1978 at the age of 28 from taking too many drugs and drinking too much alcohol. He never got over that loss, and remorse was always there, eating away at him. And then there was the drinking. People who knew the couple well remembered how much Paul liked beer and whiskey, which often led to full-blown binges. Joanne, who had to deal with late nights and inebriated absences, once drew a clear line in the sand. She made it obvious that She wouldn't put up with a husband who came home drunk from work. Too drunk to do anything. He had to pull himself together or she would leave. Paul knew she wasn't lying. The stress of Hollywood made things even worse. Newman and Woodward were both famous people who had to balance their public and private lives all the time. But while Joanne typically put their kids and stability first, Paul had a hard time balancing being a family guy and a beloved symbol. Women were constantly after him because they wanted to be the one to get Hollywood's most wanted man. Paul was brutally honest in his memoir, The Extraordinary Life of an Ordinary Man. He didn't hide his weaknesses or try to defend his reputation in it. He said that Joanne had brought out a part of him that even he was astonished by. He said that the first few years of their marriage were full of passion, thanks to a makeshift love nest that Joanne had erected in their Beverly Hills home. She called her room the F-Hut, which had a double bed from a thrift store. They often had wild sex in there, even though his kids were just down the hall. Paul remembered that we left a trail of lust everywhere. This was one of the most honest statements ever made by a Hollywood actor. But that desire wasn't always only for Joanne. Nancy Bacon, a cocktail waitress who became a Hollywood socialite, is known around town as Bacon in Legs. She was small, sexy, and impossible to resist, and she caught Newman's attention at the peak of his career. According to Bacon herself, their purported affair lasted for about 2 years, but it wasn't really a secret at all. Everyone in Hollywood knew. Friends, directors, and people who know. They took care of him. Bacon says that while Paul was telling Joanne he was working late, he was actually sneaking into her house and sleeping in her bed every night. It was intoxicating for her. It was a mix of guilt, passion, and alcohol for him. During this time, Newman was already trying to deal with his drinking issue by drowning his guilt in beer and whiskey. Bacon subsequently said that she always knew the romance would stop, not because their love faded, but because he would eventually feel guilty. There were a lot of stories going around in Hollywood, and Newman got angry with reporters who tried to find out more. But the whispers about the cheating got back to Joanne. The treachery hurt her a lot. At one point, she said she was thinking about leaving for good because she was sick of the late nights, the drinking, and now the cheating. But nonetheless, she stayed, even if everything was against her. Joanne Woodward's life was changed by that choice to stay. Later, she said that being Mrs. Paul Newman was hard. It came with fights all the time, both in public and in private, and sometimes they were equal. But she also said that the positive things were more important than the terrible things. Their girls felt the same way. Their parents' marriage was complex, hard to understand, and often even violent, yet it lasted. They didn't leave. They fought, and they fought fiercely. Paul, on the other hand, never stopped saying how much he loved Joanne. Even when women poured themselves at him and his fame made him an inexhaustible source of temptation, he always reminded the world that he already had what he wanted at home. His famous remark summed it all, yet behind closed doors, Joanne bore the scars of being that stake, of being the anchor for a man who sometimes drifted, sometimes drowned. Paul looked to be in love with Joanne until the end of his life. Friends said that his face brightened up as soon as she stepped into a room and that her presence could completely change his mood. Yes, they battled, but they also loved one another in a way that neither could find anywhere else. And Joanne, even though she wasn't known as a symbol like her husband, took on the position of symbol's wife. She regularly brushed off the attention Paul got, saying she didn't feel intimidated. But the people who were closest to her recognized that the fissures were real. She had created a stronghold of grace and calm, but behind it was the tiredness of someone who had been through a lot more than anybody else knew. Joanne, who is now 95 and lives quietly in Westport, Connecticut, doesn't have to act the part anymore. They used to utilize the Manhattan penthouse as a playground for celebrities, but they sold it. It has been more than 10 years since she was last seen in public. Alzheimer's has taken away the keen wit and intellect that used to make her a big deal in Hollywood. Joanne's reality is finally coming out, though, thanks to family, Paul's memoir, and documentaries like Ethan Hawke's The Last Movie Stars. The storybook is over. Taken away and replaced with something more human, more painful, but also stronger. Her daughters say that their mother was always there for them, even when she was about to break down. A wife who set limits, asked for respect, and wouldn't let her husband's troubles take over her life. A lady who chose to stay, not because the marriage was perfect, but because she was ready to fight for it, even when it almost broke her. Paul, in his own words, talked about his mistakes, his betrayals, and his shortcomings. But he also said that he was in awe of Joanne, the woman who not only made him a husband but also, in his words, gave birth to a creature. Their beautiful marriage may have been a lie, but what comes out of it is something more real and rare, a narrative of survival, endurance, pain, and love. Joanne's legacy is no longer just bound to Paul's as she turns 95. She is more than just the woman who stood next to Hollywood's golden boy. She has survived the harsh realities of love, including an affair, a husband's drinking, the painful loss of a stepson, and the exhaustion of carrying a troubled marriage on her shoulders. The sad thing about Joanne Woodward's life is that the world never saw her whole self while Paul was still living. She was the quiet half of a myth, the one who took the hits so the story could shine. But now that the truth is coming out, her silence speaks more than any script ever could. Joanne Woodward is no longer the perfect wife in a perfect marriage at 95. She is far more amazing than that. The woman who lived through it all, went through it all, and finally let the truth out. What do you think of the relationship between Woodward and Newman? Please leave a remark below with your opinions. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. You should also click on the next video that pops up on your screen. You will like it.